Well, we're in the 15th chapter, and
Mahayogi.
as you can see, you know, we're almost finishing the book. We've been through a long
Yeah,
section.
Mahayogi Prabhu.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to Gita Talks. Tomorrow, I was confused with the dates. Actually, birthday will be tomorrow on the 1st of October. And today is the last day of September. And on the 1st of October, the birthday of Gita Talks. So happy birthday.
Well, happy birthday to you. We began our discussion of the Bhagavad Gita, I guess a year ago, and I was invited by Madhusudan Maharaj, Devashish, and Rajasundari to participate. And I thought, well, okay, I'll do maybe 6 chapters, and if I can summarize them quickly, maybe that means what, 6 weeks? Okay. But 6 weeks turned into a year, and we're still here because it's very difficult to give the entire meaning of the Bhagavad Gita. It really contains multitudes. The Bhagavad Gita is the essence of Indian culture in a way. It's the essence of the Mahabharata. So to get the context of the Gita, you have to read the million words of the Mahabharata, maybe, and then you're really just scratching the surface, because the Krishna that's given in the Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata is expanded on in the Bhagavad Purana, which gives the real understanding of who Krishna is. Although Krishna here in this chapter is talking about Purushottama yoga. But really, to understand the position of Krishna, you have to understand other transcendental literatures like the Upanishad, the Vedas, the Puranas. And even then, we're not after understanding, are we? We're interested in bhakti or devotion, which eclipses understanding. So let me begin my reading this morning. I like to give a little invocation because I'm not particularly qualified to do this, other than that the devotees have some faith that if we get together and do this reading, then some light will come. So I have to pray for some light. And I like the Gita Mahatmyam, which says, Maline mochanam pungsham, jalasnanam dine dine, sakrit gitamritam snanam, samsara malanashanam. One may cleanse himself daily by taking a bath in water. But if one takes a bath even once in the sacred Ganges water of Bhagavad Gita, for him the dirt of material life is altogether vanquished. Gita sugita kartavya gimmanyai shastra vistarai yasvayam padmanabhasya mukha padmad vinistrita. Says, because the Gita is spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one need not read any other Vedic literature. One need only attentively and regularly read and hear Bhagavad Gita. Bharatamrita sarvasvam Vishnu vaktrad vinistritam. Gita gangodakam pitva punar janmana vidyate. One who drinks the water of the Ganges attains salvation. So what to speak of one who drinks the nectar of Bhagavad Gita? Bhagavad Gita is the essential nectar of the Mahabharata, and it is spoken by Lord Krishna himself, the original Vishnu. Sarvopanishado Gavo, Dogda Gopalanandana, Parto Vatsa Shudir Pokta, Dugdam Gitam Ritam Mahat. This Gita Upanishad is the essence of all the Upanishads, and it's just like a cow. Lord Krishna, who's famous as a cowherd boy, is milking this cow. Arjuna is just like a calf. And learned scholars and pure devotees are to drink the nectarine milk of Bhagavad Gita. Ekam Shastram Devaki Putra Gitam, Eko Devo, Devaki Putra Eva, Eko Mantras, Tasya Namami, Jani, Karma Pyekam, Tasya Devasya Seva. In this present age, people are very much eager to have one scripture, one God, one religion, and one occupation. Therefore, let there be one scripture only, Bhagavad Gita. Let there be one God, Sri Krishna. And let there be one mantra, the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All right, so we're in the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. And so Krishna just finished discussing about the banyan tree of material existence. Which is a kind of a metaphor. He's saying we're entangled in this material existence, and we're interested in becoming free from this sort of entanglement. The Vedas explained that we're stuck in this sort of endless cycle of repeated birth and death, which is called samsara. So, how to become free from samsara, or repeated birth and death? This is one of the big themes in Vedic literature. But Vedic literature really has 2 tracks. And one track is how to live a good life in this material world. And the other track is how to become free from the cycle of repeated birth and death. So there's dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. How to get what you want is kama, and artha, how to have wealth. Kama also means sex. So good sex, good money, good life. Dharma. How to do all that in a religious context. So if you want good sex and good money, you should follow the rules and live properly. And so the Vedas give support to that, especially books like the Manu Samhita, which describe the laws, how to live properly as a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, or a Shudra, according to your particular position in society. But when Arjuna, in his despair about having to fight with his own family, he comes to Krishna and he says, I can't do this. This is not really Vedic. This is not my duty as a soldier to kill my family members. I can't do it. Then Arjuna is bringing out this sort of conflict between society consciousness and God consciousness, or between the traditional Vedic point of view, which is supported in the Manu Samhita and other places, the code of behavior for a Kshatriya warrior, and God consciousness, or what is our correct constitutional position or dharma as a spirit soul. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he used to say these two things are always coming in conflict. The need of the soul and the need of the man in society. In our position in society, we find ourselves compromised in so many different ways and forced to make difficult decisions. For example, the Pancha Pandavas, the five Pandavas, they all made a promise when they married Draupadi, and that was that when one of the Pandavas was with Draupadi in the bedroom, then none of the other brothers would interfere or walk in on them. So one day there was a Brahmin who was complaining that his cow had been stolen by marauders, and this was an emergency. So he went to Arjuna and he said, please, you must help me. And so Arjuna burst in on Yudhishthira and Draupadi while they were being intimate. So there's a conflict there. On the one hand, Arjuna has promised something to his brother. He's taken a vow, and he's duty bound to honor that vow, not to interfere with his brother's relationship with his wife. But at the same time, he has to consider the plight of the Brahmin whose cow has been stolen, and how to do justice and rectify a difficult situation for the Brahmin. So which takes precedence? His vow to his brother, his honor as a family member, or the need to protect a Brahmin who is in danger? Well, Arjuna chose the path of protecting the Brahmin, but later he had to pay for that. He was exiled by his brothers to the Himalayas. Of course, in the Himalayas, he has different adventures where he meets Shiva and collects the weapons that will later help him in the Battle of Kurukshetra, like the Gandiva bow. But the point is, there's always a certain amount of conflict between our duty to family, country, society, and our own spiritual self-interest as a spirit soul on the path of enlightenment. So what does the Bhagavad Gita have to say about that? Well, from the second chapter, Krishna offers a critique of the traditional Vedic point of view. And as a warrior, Arjuna returns again and again to this idea of a code of behavior, which is grounded in his understanding of the Vedas. Arjuna understands there's certain laws and rules governing society. According to the Vedas, there's social divisions based on caste. So, since he's a warrior or a Kshatriya, Arjuna is bound by all these different laws and rules in the warrior code. And he wants to adhere to this, following the path of Dharma. But Krishna tells us that the roots of the banyan tree that entangles us here in this material world, while they're skyward, they're up there in the sky, they lead us into a forest of entanglement. And in that forest, the leaves of the tree are the Vedic hymns. The Vedas are supporting a kind of materialism, which is odd for us to think about, because normally we think the Vedas are this very high and beautiful religious thing. But Krishna's, in a subtle way, arguing against that. He said, there's something more important than the Vedic strictures which govern sattva, raja, and guna, the different modes of material nature. There's a higher power, a higher path, a course of action that transcends these ordinary considerations of dharma. And he's telling Arjuna all along that the traditional religion of the Vedas, it's well and good as long as one is satisfied by remaining in this material world. And in the previous chapter about the modes of material nature, he explains that sattva gun leads one to happiness. And after all, we do want happiness. So this general message of the Vedas promotes human civilization, it promotes order, it promotes a good family life, it promotes general well-being within this phenomenal world of birth and death. But Krishna is saying there's a higher reality. And this higher reality is the personal domain of the Supreme Lord. And we'll get to that in a couple of verses, but he's described, again, this material world as a kind of a banyan tree with roots and branches everywhere, a vast jungle with vines and tendrils that entangle us completely. And then he goes on to give us a key to how to become free from this entanglement. So this is a very sort of strange argument here, because this is taking place 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, before modernism. And we look today at the disaster which is modern civilization, and we see a complete lack of any kind of morality, a complete lack of any sort of order. This ideology that God is dead, the soul is dead, nothing is sacred, it doesn't matter what you do. And the Vedas look pretty good by comparison. Of course, it was Baudelaire or Rimbaud who thought that only by reaching the darkest depths of despair can you touch bottom, so to speak, and really begin your path to enlightenment. Maybe there's some truth in that, because as long as you're situated in the mode of goodness and everything is happy, maybe you're not so interested in reaching out to God or discovering your internal self. But in any case, normally, if we look at the godless condition of our ordinary Kali Yuga society, and then you look at the Vedas by comparison, we think, well, Vedic tradition is pretty good. Why would Krishna knock it or speak against it? And in that point of view, we'll see there's a lot of people in India who don't take to Krishna consciousness. They're not interested in Krishna. They prefer a different form of Hinduism that in their view is closer to the mode of goodness, because they think, well, Krishna's trying to tear down the Vedic order by advocating bhakti. And after all, isn't he immoral? He has Arjuna kill Karna. He dances with other men's wives in the dark of night in Vrindavan. So Krishna's a thief. He's an immoral person. Why should we worship him? So this is one of the dynamics that makes the Bhagavad Gita a fascinating study. Krishna's telling us that the scriptures are promoting a kind of traditional sense of well-being, but that entangles us with promises of a good life in heaven. So he tells Arjuna to go deeper. The ordinary Vedic point of view is good, but having a good life in this material world, it's superficial. It's something like being a trustee in a prison system where you have a nice job in the library, but you're still imprisoned. You may eat nice food and have a nice living situation, but this is really far from your self-interest as a free soul. So Krishna tells Arjuna that Vedas are fine. In fact, he's the author of the Vedas as Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, who's empowered by Krishna as a kind of Shaktivesh avatar to write and compile the Vedas. He tells Arjuna in this chapter, he says, look, if you think that I don't understand the Vedas, I wrote the Vedas and I know the Vedas. No one knows the Vedas better than me because I'm God himself. And as God, I'm really the subject and the object of the Vedas. But God himself, as the author of the Vedas, is demanding a higher conclusion than simple morality. He's asking us to go beyond good and evil, as Nietzsche put it, but he's asking us to aspire to a higher good, to a higher transcendental purpose. So as the subject and object of the Vedas, Krishna is telling Arjuna that complete surrender to God is the highest goal of life. And this is the purport of the 15th chapter. So now apparently the Bhagavad Gita is an exhortation to war. And superficial readers will see the Gita as a kind of a saga about an ancient war with Karna as the great tragic hero. But the true message of the Gita is deeper and far more subtle. And this is not just my opinion. And I read somewhere, someone was criticizing Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami, saying, well, his version of the Gita, this is just his opinion. But that's not true. Centuries of gurus from the time of Shankaracharya even, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Jiva Goswami, Baladev Vidyabhushan, Bhaktivinoda Thakur in the 19th century, have taught that the message here is not one of war, but of eternal peace. So the teaching is not how to perfect the art of war or how to be a Vedic Kshatriya, but how to realize the highest kind of spiritual yoga. So Krishna here is rejecting traditional thinking about caste and morality, and he's exhorting Arjuna to become a free soul through the complete transformation of his character. And one of the key elements in this is to become free from the false ego of morality and the false prestige of tradition. Because when you're good, you have the ego of being good. Saint Augustine, in his City of God, he wrote that the joy of the saints of heaven is increased by seeing the suffering of the sinners in hell. And so this is the ego of the saint, because we are saintly and pious. We can look down on those who are sinners and think, I'm pious. But when you become free from this sort of false prestige. And so here in the 15th chapter, the message is called Purushottama Yoga, or how to attain perfection and transformation through complete surrender to the Supreme Person. So Krishna's not just telling Arjuna to follow his duty as a soldier, which implies service to family, tribe, and country. He's telling him he must bend his sense of duty as a warrior to include surrender and devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Otherwise, his action, his service to his family and his country, it's really just karmic. It's bound by the laws of material nature and the three modes, sattva, raja, and tama. Now, to attain such an egoless state of transcendence, it's not easy for a conditioned soul. So Krishna describes what's needed. And he says, in the fifth verse of the 15th chapter, he says, Nirmana moha, jita sanga dosha, adhyatma nitya vinivrita kama, dvandvair vimukta, shuka dukkha sangyair, gachanti amudha, padam avyayam tat. So if you're interested in that avyayam padam, that eternal situation, you want to become amudha, not bewildered. You want to become dvandvair vimukta, free from dvandva. Dvandva means duality. So he says those who are free from false prestige, moha, illusion and false association, who understand the eternal, who are done with material lust, who are free from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who unbewildered know how to surrender to the Supreme Person, they attain to that eternal kingdom. So Prabhupada comments, the surrendering process is described here very nicely. The first qualification is that one not be deluded by pride. So here what Krishna is saying mirrors the version of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, where he says, Trinadapi sunichena, tarorapi sahishnuna, amanina manadena, kirtanya sadakari. So if you want to reach that level of ecstasy, that level of spiritual satisfaction, which is available to the surrendered souls, then you must become free from pride and ignorance. Then Krishna begins to describe the nature of his eternal abode. Sometimes it's useful to talk about the goal or the prayojana. What is it that we're trying to attain through all this? And he says, Natad pashayate surya na shashanka na pavaka yad gatva na nivartante tad dhamma paramam mama. He says, that supreme abode of mine is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. So my brahmachari name was Mukunda. And when I went to Srila Sridhar Maharaj for Brahmin initiation, he modified that. But I asked him, what is the meaning? And he said, well, you know the meaning of Mukunda, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, Mukunda means the giver of liberation. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj said, well, this is superficial. Normally, the meaning of Mukunda is muktim dadati, dadati, who gives, mukti, liberation. Muktim dadati means one who gives liberation, mukunda. But Srila Sri Rama said, no. It should be muktim kukutsit dadati, one who gives something which makes liberation look ugly. Kukutsit means ugly. So muktim kukutsit dadati, mukunda, the giver of something that makes liberation look ugly. So the Vedas talk about dharma, artha, kama, and mukti, or moksha. But when Krishna talks about mukti, he's talking about something much higher than the ordinary idea of mukti. Mukti means liberation. You become free from the prison house of this material world, or the cycle of repeated birth and death. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj used to describe amrita, or immortality, as being positive and progressive. In other words, mukti is not simply liberation from this material world, but entrance into the spiritual abode of the Supreme Personality of Krishna, which is called Krishna Loka, or Goloka Vrindavan. And that's described here in this verse. Prabhupada comments, in the spiritual sky, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity, because all the planets are self-luminous. We have only one planet in this universe, the sun, which is self-luminous, but all the planets in the spiritual sky are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of these planets, called Vaikunthas, constitute the shining sky known as the Brahmajyoti, but actually, the effulgence is emanating from the planet of Krishna, Goloka Vrindavan. Part of that shining light is covered by the Mahat Tattva, or the material world. Other than this, the major portion of that shining sky is full of spiritual planets, which are called Vaikunthas, chief of which is Goloka Vrindavan. As long as a living entity is in this dark material world, he's in conditioned life, but as soon as he reaches the spiritual sky, by cutting through the false perverted tree of this material world, he becomes liberated. Then there's no chance of his coming back here. One should be captivated by this information. So Krishna's giving Arjuna an idea of his prospect. And this is an interesting verse as well, because it reflects a bit on the Gayatri mantra, where it says, Om Bhur Bhuva Sva Tat Savitur Varenyam. That sometimes we think of Bhur, Bhuva, and Swa to be material planetary systems. But Srila Sridhar Maharaj explains that we can conceive of Bhu as the world of experience, or the physical world, and Bhuva as the world of mental experience, or the mental world, where Sva, often called the upper world, really refers to the subtle aspects of our existence, including intelligence and false ego. But Bhur Bhuva Sva Tat Savitur, there's something that illuminates these different worlds of mind, sense experience, intellect, ego. What illuminates our physical experience is the soul. That's the light of our physical experience. And in a metaphoric way, you can think of that as the sun, because we can't see the light of the soul, but you can see the light of the sun. And everything that is in this material world derives its energy from the sun. So in the same way, everything in our existence derives its energy from the soul. And where does the soul derive its light, its energy? The light of the soul is the Paramatma. And where is all of this light coming from? Where does the light of the sun, the moon, all the planets, where does that light originally come from? Well, it comes from the spiritual world. So Krishna continues. He says, Mamai vangsho jiva loke, jiva bhuta sanatana, mana shastan indriyani, prakriti stani karshati. He says, the living souls are defined as Angsha and Vimanangsha, energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Eternal fragmental parts, Mamai Vangsha, Angsha, it means a particle. So there's internal particles of soul, which proper belong to the spiritual world. They're Nitya Siddha. And then there are the Nitya Buddha souls, who are Karshati, they're struggling, they're grappling hard. The conditioned souls are bound up as though shackled by iron chains. We're bound by the false ego in the mind, which is the chief agent driving us in this material existence. So Krishna says, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts, and due to conditioned life, they're struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So we have to try to become free from this, but it's very difficult. Shariram yadavapnoti yachchapi ut yachchapyut kram atishwara grihit vaitani sangyati vayur gandhan ivashayat. So being bound in this material world by false ego, the living entity carries his different conceptions or her different conceptions of life from one body to the other, as the air carries aromas. So this is a nice way of understanding how the subtle body moves from one body into the next, just as the air carries a fragrance. The body of false ego is subtle. And when we quit this material body, we move into another kind of a body and then quit that according to our consciousness. So if we assume the consciousness of a dog or a cat, we can become more and more dog-like in our next body. Sometimes people look at dogs and they think, this dog is so human. They look into the dog's eyes and they see sort of existential sadness, as if the dog really wants to be part of the family. And it may be that that dog in his previous life had a human form. So we have this human form of life. We should avoid wasting it on ridiculous, mundane adventures and try to take to what the Vedanta calls the Tato Brahma Jigyasa, or the search for spiritual understanding, or what Srila Sridhar Maharaj called Krishnanusandana, Tato Krishna Vigyasa. It's time to look into Krishna consciousness. Real consciousness is Krishna consciousness. Therefore, one is situated in Krishna consciousness. He's in his pure life. Krishna says, Shrotram chakshu sparshanam cha rasanam grichanam eva cha adishtaya manaschayam vishayan upasevate. The jiva, the living entity, thus takes one gross body after another and obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So it's interesting that you hear so often people saying, well, I do what I want to do, and I'm just going to be me. But their idea of being me has more to do with the particular kind of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and mind that they've accepted as a consequence of their karma. So Krishna says, Utkramantam shtitam vapi bunjanam vagunan vitam vimudha nanu pashyanti jnana chakshusha. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So vimudha is interesting. The word mudha, it means donkey. And V intensifies. It means extreme donkeyism. And donkeys are lovable animals. They're wonderful. They're very strong. But if the donkey doesn't want to move, you can do everything and he won't move. You can pull him, exhort him, beat him, but the donkey's not going to go. So Krishna's comparing people who are willfully ignorant to this noble animal, the donkey. Because you can awaken someone who's sleeping, but if someone is determined to go on sleeping, even if he's awake, if you have your eyes closed and you're thinking, I need 15 more minutes, and somebody is pushing you and kicking you and saying, come on, wake up, you could pretend to be asleep. So it's impossible to wake someone who pretends to be asleep. And really, spiritual knowledge is self-evident. They know this in India. It's just accepted as a self-evident axiomatic truth that the soul exists. There is Atma. Atma is the background of everything that exists. You don't have to go out with a microscope or a telescope and look for it, because it's like going outside your house and looking in the window to see if there's anybody home. If I'm wondering, well, am I home? All right, I'm going to go outside and look in the window and have a look. I don't see myself. Therefore, there's no one in this house. Nobody occupies it. This is a fool's point of view. The existence of the soul is obvious and self-evident and exists beyond proof. There's a famous theorist named Gödel, and he points out that there are some mathematic truths that cannot be proved, but they're true. So the soul is like that. And as long as you determine that, well, if I cannot prove with positivistic evidence the existence of the soul as a physical entity, then not only it doesn't exist, but I'm going to dismiss all metaphysical questions, and I'm going to proceed in life as if the only thing that exists is matter. The only values that exist are the satisfaction of physical matter. And then you look around and you'll see a world like the world that we have today. I don't even have to take time condemning materialism. Everyone knows what it is. So Krishna says the soul is self-evident. If you pay attention to who you are, you'll notice the Atma exists. Yatanto yoginas chainam pashyanti atmani avishtitam. You can see the soul, pashyanti atmani. Jatanto pyakritatmano, nainam pashyanti chetasaha. But if you're akrita atmana, you're determined to act against the soul. Prabhupada said those without self-realization. Akrita, but krit, it means to do. Sanskrit, karma, krit, to do. Akrita atmana, you're doing against the soul. The endeavoring transcendentalists who are situated in self-realization can see all this clearly. It's not difficult. But those whose minds are not developed, he's being generous, and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see what is taking place, though they may try. Krishna continues, verse 12, Yad aditya gatam tejo, jagad basayate kilam, yach chandaramasi yach chagno, tejo vidhi mamakam. The splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of the fire are also from me. Well, we explained this. The word is teja, which means power, this power, strength. But the power of the sun, the illumination, light, it comes from spiritual light. So the sun is a metaphor here in a way. The light of the sun is a metaphor for spiritual light. So Krishna says, Gam avishya chabutani darayami aham ajasa pushnami choshadi sarva somo bhutva rasatmakaha. Says, I enter into each planet, and by my energy, they stay in orbit. I become the moon, and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. That's very nice. Rasatmaka, somo bhutva rasatmakaha. So soma here translates the moon. So he puts the rasa in everything. Prabhupada says the word rasatmaka is very significant. Everything becomes palatable by the agency of the Supreme through the influence of the moon. Aham vaishvanara bhutva praninam dekam ashritaha pranapana samayukta pachamyanam chaturvidam. It says, I'm the fire of digestion. So his point is, again, something like, if you can't see God because you say, well, where is he? I don't see him. I prayed to him last night and I didn't see a big face in the sky telling me to do something. Well, really, divinity should be self-evident. We're surrounded every day by all kinds of different miracles. The miracle of birth, the miracle of life, the miracle of water. How can I see? How is it possible that some strange combination of blood and water in my eyeball allows me the power of vision? These are miracles. You can't deny it. How is it possible that I can make some vibration in my throat and that vibration goes out to people all over the world and they can hear the Bhagavad Gita and think about this message? That's a miracle. The fire of digestion in your body, that's a miracle. How do you digest food? You put something in here and it gives you energy. That's a miracle. And you can develop all kinds of interesting biological explanations. But you can't deny that life itself is a miracle. I put some seeds in the ground a year ago, and today there's flowers coming out of a plant. How does that happen? You can say, oh, well, you know, there's a biological process and cell mitosis and so on, but who put the energy inside the seed? Where does that power come from? Well, God is telling us here, that's coming from me. I'm the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming, to digest the 4 kinds of food stuff. What is the air of life? What happens when the air of life leaves the body? Can you collect it from somewhere and put it back inside the body? No, you can't. So these are all different miracles, and Krishna's reminding Arjuna that above and beyond the practical codes of human life given by the Vedas, there's the miraculous, and we need to surrender to the miraculous. Sarvasya chaham hridisani vishto matasmitir jnanam apoghram cha vedaischa sarvairaham eva vedyo vedanta krit vedavid eva chaham. This is very nice. He says, Vedanta krit vedavid eva chaham. Some Vedavid. I know the Vedas. You want to talk about the Vedas, Arjuna? I know the Vedas. Veda Krit. I made the Vedas. I'm situated in everyone's heart. And from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So even the subtle powers of the brain, mind, intelligence, forgetfulness, remembrance, these come from me. You cannot remember or forget selectively. You forget things you want to remember, and you remember things you want to forget. Why is that? By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I'm the knower of the Vedas. So he's telling Arjuna very clearly, if you want to talk about the Vedas, you're talking to the compiler of the Vedas, the knower and the object. And he says, now listen to me. Dvo imo purisho loke ksharas chakshara evacha kshara sarvani bhutani kutasto kshara uchate. There's 2 different kinds of living beings, the fallible and the infallible. And in this material world, every living entity is fallible. So this gets back to what we were saying before. Living entities in this material world are jiva bhuta, or they're kshara sarvani bhutani. They're fallible. Those who are connected in divine love with the Supreme Personality of Godhead are called nitya siddha, or akshara. They're infallible. But besides the fallible and the infallible, the Upanishad says, Nityo Nityanam, Chaitanas Chaitananam. This is in Kata and Shvetashvatara Upanishad. It's an interesting point. He says, everywhere there's gradation, there's smaller and lesser. So there's lesser spirit souls, like you and me, and there's the Supreme Soul. Why should you think it would be any different? You see gradation in everything in this mundane world. There's tiny living beings and there's great living beings. Why should you think that you're God? Why should you not understand that above the living entities, conditioned and liberated, there's one supreme living personality, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who maintains them and gives them all the facility of enjoying according to their different karma. That's the Upanishad, and Krishna says here, again, besides the kshara, or the fallible, and the akshara, or the infallible, besides these 2, there's the greatest living personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord himself. who enters the three worlds and maintains them. Yasmat charamatitoham aksharad apichotama atosmi loke vede cha pratita purushottama. That's the Purush Uttama. So before we were hearing about the Kshetra and the Kshetragya and the Purush, right? Purush Prakriti, Viveka Yoga, which was the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Difference between matter, spirit, and the Supreme Soul. So here, Krishna is making a distinction between the individual souls who are either Nitya Siddha or Nitya Buddha, and the Supreme Soul, who is Purushottama. Because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible and infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that Supreme Person. This is kind of interesting because, like I said before, a lot of people, they don't like the Bhagavad Gita because they don't like the idea that Krishna would be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why not me? Why not you? Why not Jesus Christ? Well, Jesus Christ may be a personality of Godhead, but here Krishna identifies as the Supreme Personality of God. A lot of people object to that. They don't like it. But Krishna's pointing out, this is stated in the Vedic literatures. I'm not just here telling you that I'm God because I feel like it. It's in the Vedas, it's in the Puranas. Another section of the Mahabharata, Bhishma Dev gives the 1,000 names of God, among which Krishna is one. Why Krishna? It means the most beautiful one. So you can think of, why should the God of the Old Testament have a monopoly on being God? Simply because the Christians went out and conquered the world and forced people to accept the Bible. That's not fair. Why should Jehovah be the supreme name of God, or Elohim? Krishna means the most beautiful one. So our conception of divinity is that God is reality, the beautiful, not someone who is capable of destroying or creating the planet. The Old Testament of the Bible ends with the words, lest I smite the earth with a curse. In other words, you worship me or I will destroy the earth. So this is not the supreme idea of Godhead according to the Vaishnava point of view, which is the view expressed here in the Bhagavad Gita. The highest idea of divinity is rasa and beauty. So anyways, this is Krishna's statement. Now, if you don't like the idea that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you like the idea that Jehovah is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, many of the deep truths that are being supplied here are still very worthwhile, where he says, try to become free from ego, try to understand the nature of the soul, try to understand the nature of divinity. The light of the sun comes from God. All these things are equally applicable in Christianity. So you don't have to be an extreme follower of Krishna to love the message of the Bhagavad Gita. It's a very deep and powerful spiritual message. So Krishna says, because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I'm the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. Yo mam evam asamudha, janati purushottama, sasarvavid bhajati mam sarva bhavena bharata, Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharat. And a lot of people don't like the commentary of Bhaktivedanta Swami because he calls his book, the Bhagavad Gita, as it is. And they say they ascribe a certain sort of fundamentalism to his point of view. But what he's saying is that when Krishna says Mam, he means Krishna. Krishna's talking about himself, and he says Mam. Now, other Bhagavad Gita commentators, they try to explain this in a different way, and they say, well, Mam, it means the eternal I, because when you talk about you, you say I, and when I talk about me, I say I. So when Krishna says I, he's talking about the universal I, and when Krishna says me, he means the universal me, that I am you and you are me and he is she and we are all together, as John Lennon famously parodied the idea of Shankaracharya in his Come Together song. But clearly when Krishna says Mam, he's talking about God, Krishna. Sarvavit bhajati mam. So when you worship me, then you will come to this higher realization. So then Krishna says, iti guyam tamam shastram, idam uktam mayanaga etad budva buddhiman syat kritakrityas chabarata. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Why is this confidential? It's confidential because we don't want to hear it. It's a secret, but it's an open secret. It's something like when you say, oh, I'm fat, I need to lose weight. And someone tells you, well, have you tried diet and exercise? And you say, oh, no, diet and exercise. Yes, I know all about that, but it's not for me. So it's an open secret. There's nothing really specially mysterious about the idea of surrendering to God. But it's a secret because you're not going to listen to that. You'll think, oh, no, there must be something else. So he says, this is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one. And it is disclosed now by me. So now you've heard it. Bhagavad Gita's been around for a long time. This is your opportunity to think about the message of Krishna and try to surrender. How do you do that? With the help of Guru and Vaishnava. Whoever understands this will become wise, and his endeavors will know perfection. Wow, what a blessing. Iti guyam tamam shastram, idam uktam mayanaga, etad budva buddhiman syat. This is the wise, the Buddha, the buddhiman. They will understand this and act accordingly. So Prabhupada comments, in other words, by understanding this philosophy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engaging in his transcendental service, everyone can become free from all contaminations of the modes of nature. So, Srila Prabhupada summarizes, he says, when one is performing devotional service in the association of pure devotees in full Krishna consciousness, there are certain things which require to be vanquished altogether. The most important thing one has to surmount is weakness of the heart. The first fall down is caused by the desire to lord it over material nature. Thus one gives up the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. The second weakness of the heart is that as one increases the propensity to lord it over material nature, he becomes attached to matter and the possession of matter. The problems of material existence are due to these weaknesses of the heart. In this chapter, the first 5 verses describe the process of freeing oneself from these weaknesses of heart, and the rest of the chapter, from the 6th verse through the end, discusses Purushottama Yoga. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports, the 15th chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, in the matter of Purushottama Yoga, the yoga of the Supreme Person. So thank you very much. Once again, muchas gracias, Govinda Vilas, Dhanyavad, and thank you to Suvashini for her kindness, her hospitality, her expert South Indian cooking. Gaura Nataraj, Bom Dia in Brazil, Vishwanath Prabhu, Hare Krishna, and Vrindavan Chandra, Slava Ukraini, Ananta Shesh, Hari Bol. Muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros otra vez. And Lydia Lilavati, thank you again. And thank you to Braja Sundari, our coordinator and expert translator here at Gita Talks. We're celebrating 1 year of doing this. And by the grace of Krishna and Guru and Vaishnava, Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, Govinda Maharaj, and subsequent followers, we finished the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Next week, we hope to begin talking about the 16th chapter, the divine and demoniac natures. Stay tuned and don't miss it. The divine and demoniac natures. That proves to be a great chapter. Thank you all. Any questions? Anybody?
Jai Mahayogi Prabhu ki jai. Есть ли у кого-то вопросы?
Jai to everybody. Jai to Madhusudana Maharaj, who's given me a lot of encouragement to continue doing this. And the fine folks at Villa Govinda, Pranashish in Ireland, my friends in Ireland, Advai Krishna, Jai Govinda Prabhu, our friends in Italy, India, Bhakti Sudhir Goswami Maharaj, Avadut Maharaj, and his friends and followers around the world. It amazes me that you have the patience to listen to someone like me talk. You are all very exceptional souls. I notice my students at the school where I work, it's very difficult for them to listen more than 2 or 3 minutes. So I thank you again for your kind attention.
Mahayogi Prabhu, you are telling us very interesting things. Jai Mahayogi Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
All right.
Thank you very much.
I have a phone call.
Yes, I'll see you next week.
Any questions? I have a phone call I have to take.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Please accept our
Nope.
Dandavad.
All right. We'll see you next week. Hare
Yeah.
Krishna, Bhakti Vrinda Ki Jai.
Yeah. Hare Krishna. Yes, and I want to announce also that now we are collecting donations to pay for Zoom account. All the information about this is on our Facebook page and the Instagram page and in Telegram group, because we need to pay some money for the possibility to make translation and to make these meetings. So if you can donate something, it will be very good and cool, and thank you in advance. and see you next week. Hare Krishna. My Dandavat pranams to everybody. Hare Krishna.